just write.
Yeah.
I don't care what it looks like. It can be Egyptian hieroglyphics. I'm not worried about that. We can polish, we can massage, we can build it up into a point or a position where you find it more palatable, and so does your audience. But even then, actually, who cares?
Yeah.
Who's to say that this author, that author was the greatest? It's completely subjective. If you like Dr. Seuss, you like Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
You know, better that you're engaged and reading and participating than being disengaged. So in terms of me writing, I just love to write. I've written 9 books. Each one of them has done incredibly well for me. Each one of them has found its own audience, has its own success, and has given me a lot of pleasure seeing other people enjoy and participate with me in terms of my writing. This latest book I'm very, very proud of, although again, off air I was talking about the fact that I'm almost going back through it and adding another 2, 3, 4 layers to it, so it may resurface in 2019, towards the back end of 2019. It's approximately an inch thick now. It could come back later in the year 3 inches thick.
It's a huge topic. Like as we said earlier off air, it's got so many different avenues to go down. And do you feel that you've just scratched the surface?
I feel like this book has been a long-winded germination of an idea, and the book, for those people who aren't familiar with it, is called Put Your Damn Phone Down. It's about disconnecting to reconnect. It's a non-prescriptive, provocative space in which people can explore 50 very raw questions. What does religion mean to you? Does everybody have depression? Have you ever been racist? Is a lifelong marriage possible? You can explore these questions based on the question and through an electronic breakout. I wanted to find a way in which I could combine real world with some tech and create conversation and relationships. So, have you ever been racist? Has the breakout to sit down on your own with a friend, friends, and watch Spike Lee's iconic, and I think should be mandatory viewing in schools, Do the Right Thing.
Yep.
Unbelievable film. Just a stunning film, which I believe every school in Australia, probably around the year 9 mark, could sit down and build literally a month's worth of questioning and investigation and knowledge base just on that film. And it would be so much more appropriate than so many of the other pathways education stumbles down in this particular time. So for me, the book has those 50 questions, which are absolutely fantastic for the audience to use as breakouts and provocations, but they're throughout the book interspliced are some very, very gritty, sharply written pieces, stories, breakouts from my life.
Yeah.
So some stories in there that I've never shared before, from personal injury and shame, disappointment to triumph, working with a young heroin addict, going through an abortion, all these sorts of things, which are very, very brutal topics, but the reality of one person's life.
What was that process like for you to write those personal stories down? Is that a therapeutic process for you, firstly? And then secondly, what's the internal story that you tell yourself that then this could go out to tens of thousands of people, that they're going to know your story and they'll create judgments on it, and not knowing you that well, and that's just how it circles around, for instance. But it almost feels to me like you're such an open book that you actually don't care because you're okay with how you are, and then that ability for you to do that really well has built resilience anyway, because you're not attached to anything. So if you're not attached to anything, you can't get pulled down because there's nothing to pull down. So it's like you can pop the water balloon, but there's nothing in it because I've let everything out anyway, and everyone knows it. So all of a sudden, no one wants to pop the balloon. But when the balloon's full of a bunch of shit and you're in the spotlight a bit, people want to pop it because they want to see it manifest and spill everywhere.
Again, thought-provoking question. I think for me, the interesting aspect of what you spoke about there is the perception that I have no shit. I do.
Yeah.
There are many, many layers and depths and nooks and crannies to my personality and my being, which I'm not really going to allow anyone bar the closest of people into. And so when I share a story publicly or share something via a book, there are a myriad of other layers which
cool.
I'm not sharing. Use the story about abortion as an example. It's a story which I threw around in my head for probably 10 years as to whether I should share it or not. It was a very, very desperate time in my life. It's something that still affects me. It's something that still brings an enormous amount of sadness into my life. I shared it once publicly in terms of a speaking forum. I shared it because I was backed into a corner. And I felt like it was the only thing I could do in that moment. And because I've got this incredible ability based on my work to instantly see what people respond to, I could see that this room full of people were in a position where they didn't want to condemn me or belittle the space. They wanted to learn more. Because again, common sense would say 100 young men, 100 young women in any particular school setting, there is going to be a percentage, probably a far greater percentage than we will ever realise, of those young people, let alone anyone else, who are going to experience an unwanted pregnancy or unplanned pregnancy, and are going to have to deal with the repercussions. And the repercussions of that particular time aren't just necessarily felt in the moment. They're certainly not just physical. There's the emotional, there's the psychological effects that can be felt for years and years and years and years beyond. So for me, I had an inclination that this story could be useful for other people to appreciate and to learn from. When I was writing it, I was a little fearful that there would be some backlash towards it because it is a provocative subject space. I do a lot of work across all sorts of cultures, all sorts of religions, so I felt like there's going to be someone in that mix who reads this story and says, hey, I'm not copying that. I don't think you should have written that. I think you should have done that. I've been very fortunate, whether it's the fact that I'm 6'2" and certainly not a shrinking violet, that no one's approached me about it. But I think that the truth is people understand how and why it was written. And again, I think in 2018-19, people appreciate that it's just fact. People are going through this. And to be able to share a story around it is a positive.
I think, Glenn, without a doubt, that's, we need to break the barriers of it's a common story that the abortions or similar things that happen in people's lives that do go on for years that that are really impactful, negatively.
I think about that child all the time. All the time.
The power to bring it up in conversation that's happening internally to so many people, that you to share it externally has a voice, especially for a male voice, which potentially you don't hear as much in that abortion setting of the pain from the dad as much, is because again the men's narrative isn't to speak up and show heartfulness in that space. So I think that's really important and really well understood. Does a story like that then provoke you to go, okay, well, what else can I do? You dig deeper into sort of the war chest and go, well, what else? Where's the barrier? Does it of what I will and won't share? Does it sort of deepen because of the impact of a story like that? You're like, I've got other ones that could really be beneficial to society and to people that you're happy to bring out.
Your question evokes a memory of watching Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. And for anyone who's familiar with that film, the bad guy essentially wins. And I remember as a kid watching that film and it ending and sort of scratching my head and saying, I think the Jedi, the Alliance, just lost this, and just being completely confused. I did, given my personality, think it was kind of wonderful, but the more I sat there, I thought, this just wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And if you, whilst a lot of people will critically say they feel like it was the best film of that entire Star Wars saga, if you will, for most people it's too much.
Yep.
You just can't have the bad guy walk away at the end. So the stories that I share publicly or that I share via my writing, I do have to temper them so that they end up in a space where the audience isn't gutted, isn't exhausted, isn't in the fetal position in the corner of the room begging for me to stop. It's not a murder mystery, and even in the murder mystery sense, I'd suggest more often than not somehow the investigator or the murder's been solved, etc., etc. So everything that I do publicly is about protecting my audience. I've tried to protect my audience with this book as well. No one... The truth is, at times, Glenn Manton can be a desperately sad, mixed up, confused, flat human being, as I believe everyone can be. Does that last for a minute or an hour or a day or a week? Sometimes all of the above. But does Glenn Manton, and this is the truth, does Glenn Manton possess within him, a red cape and an ability to find the strength to push through that and find a way out of it? Yes. So for me, it's important to be reality-based, to be truthful, but also to look for the moments that lead us to a more positive outcome, because creating that sense of desperation and fear and sadness within an audience, to me, isn't the point that you want to leave the conversation.
Yeah, it's nice. It's really articulate that some of the writing you're doing is not just to protect yourself, but I've never thought about it in the lens to protect the audience, because you don't want to leave them stranded and leave them struggling.
It's just not a positive thing to do, to have the audience read the last page and then all the kittens died. Okay, fantastic. What do I do with that?
Yeah, exactly.
So there has to be the truth in the story that you're sharing, but you also really need to find a way to create an environment in which your audience can use it, whether it's in the public speaking space or as an author. Your audience can use your experience, your knowledge, your strength to bolster their own. Recently I heard a particular person whom I really regret not being able to remember their name talk about young people and say that it's our job to build and decorate young people. I think that's absolutely beautiful. So
nice.
If everything that I'm doing is about trying to build, and in particular young people, is about building and decorating young people, then that is a really clear objective, and that relates to how I would write a book as well.
Before we go, because we're running out of time, but
we've rambled.
When you talk young people, and this is something that I'm really curious about, is how, in all the work you've done with young people and what you know, how important is to create ritual and ceremony for young people, whether it's in a sporting environment. I know that, for generations it was something that was pivotal in cultures, but something that, because of disconnection, we've lost a little bit of that ritual and ceremony. Like, do you see that, is there any link to some of the work you've done with people that there's been a lack of that within their upbringing, that they've fallen off the cart a little bit because of that?
I was leaning back in my chair taking in that question. I almost didn't want to rejoin the microphone again, because you've pushed into a space which I think is just incredibly sad. I think it's really desperately disappointing what you've just spoken about, the fact that we have lost so many of these cultural moments, cultural in terms of individuals and groups in all sorts of settings, which you alluded to too, that are very, very important, and build trust, build connection, build understanding between individuals, groups. We alluded earlier to the idea of sitting as a family at the kitchen table and sharing dinner, breaking bread each day, and touching base with the people around the table and hearing tall stories and true. What is the fodder for the day around that table? Those times have essentially evaporated. And that's a great concern. And I think the people who are at the forefront of building culture, building connection, building